I'm hoping that our next guest has been able to take a vacation after this past year. Dealing with the pandemic, but also the crazy election cycle. Let's bring in Debbie Binder. She is the West Bloomfield Township Clerk. Great to have you with us, Debbie.
Thanks, Ronnie. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for having me today. Nice to see you.
Please tell me you took a vacation.
I won't say I took a vacation, but I did take some time, like some partial days off. It was definitely a little bit quieter, but we actually have a May 4th election, so we've been back for the last couple months. So, but I'm not complaining. I did have some nice, more leisurely days.
So we do know that, the West Bloomfield School District has a bond issue coming up on the May ballot. But what is it like for you and your team when it comes to some of these, I don't want to say smaller elections, but they definitely don't get the attention or the crowds that are like our November election?
Okay, and just to correct, it's not a bond issue. It's actually a Headley restoration, so it's a little bit different. But these elections, it's funny, we think of them as a small election too, because by our standards, it is a small election. We're about 56,000 registered voters in West Bloomfield, but 25,000 of those registered voters live in the West Bloomfield School District. So what we think is a small election, if I told another clerk that we had an election including 25,000 voters, they would say that's not a small election. And we have right now, it will be a lower turnout election, they always are. Most of the prep work, though, is actually the same. You're testing the machines the same. You're doing a lot ahead of time in preparation. Your big differences are that you're not as busy at the window and you don't need quite as many election workers. But you still have to staff the precincts that are involved. We have 13 precincts that are affected by this election, so we have to have staff in each of those precincts as well as in an absent voter counting board to count the ballots. Right now, we only have about 3,500 ballots out. So it's not going to be like in November where we had 33,269 ballots back. It'll definitely be significantly smaller. However, we're in the point now where a lot of our work is very similar to what it is for a large election because we're preparing and testing the equipment.
So, Debbie, when it comes to trying to get volunteers, I think one of these smaller, or not so much smaller, but one of these elections is really a great one for some volunteers to maybe dip their toe in the water and try to really learn about the experience because, too, if they have questions, it could be a little bit easier to answer them.
There's no question. It's a much slower pace on election day, especially in the AB County Board and in the precincts. So it is a good opportunity. We're fortunate. Last year, I think we've talked before, we recruited over 300 new election workers last year, in large part with your help and your support. So we do have a large pool now from which to draw. We are looking at this opportunity when it's a smaller election to increase training of people who want to step into leadership roles, because this is a good time where they'll have time during the day to learn something new and to expand their knowledge. So we do look at it, we call it kind of the training wheels election. It's an opportunity to give people the experience and to give them the time to talk them through things so they understand it better. Sometimes they will be a little bored. We warn them they will feel a little bit overstaffed, but we have to staff knowing that people call off and that people need to have lunch breaks. So we staff accordingly, but it will be a slower election. I do want to make sure we point out to everybody, though, if you're not in the West Bloomfield School District, you are not voting in this election. So if you drive by an election day and you see a sign in front, or you find out that your neighbor got their ballot or turned it in, remember, if you're not in West Bloomfield School District, this election does not apply to you.
So is this the only issue on the ballot?
Is the only issue on the ballot.
Why is that? Is that normal? It seems a lot of work for one issue.
It happens, until I was in this role, I didn't understand what went into as much. And so I thought kind of the same thing. But when you're in the role of clerk and you find out what it takes to get an initiative and put it on the ballot, and you're getting multiple boards that have to approve language and decide when to go for things, and the timing of a millage or something that is expiring, that dictates when you have to go onto the ballot, and then you have to dictate. There are a lot of components that go to it in getting a board together. We had decided to do one actually election with another entity, and then they changed their mind and waited a year, and we were already in go mode. So I think that there are a lot of different components that go into it, including looking at when the previous millage that they're looking at expires. So it's much more complex than I ever realized until I was in this role.
It really is interesting because I didn't even know that until we were just now having this conversation. Because what is the cost associated with having, an election process for something like this?
It probably will cost, this one being a little bit smaller. Last year they were much more expensive, probably somewhere between 40 and 55, 60,000, depending on the election. There's a lot. One of the biggest expenses is postage. The postage is high, so it's not it's not without great cost. There's no question, but they've done their due diligence, and the boards look at it and decide whether it's a cost-effective approach to go. What happens if you wait and you're on a large ballot is we have people tend to, what we say, fall off the ballot as they go down ballot. And the lower on the ballot the item is, the less people are interested. They come in, they're voting for the top three, and the ones at the bottom are left to very few people who scroll down to the bottom of that ballot. So sometimes it's more attractive for them to go, and they can actually get people who are genuinely interested in the topic.
And sometimes the argument is that by doing it like this, you're getting the people who are most likely going to vote yes on your issue to come in on these off times, to take time out, rather than like in a general election.
But you can also look at it and say, and I agree, that is the perception, but you can also see that sometimes it also gets the people who are opposed to something with the same fervor. And if you look at what happens on a long ballot and it gets down to the bottom, that decision's left to very few people who bother to get to the bottom of that ballot. So I know it's not ideal. I know it doesn't sound like there's an ideal way to do it, but there are a lot more components that go into those decisions than even I understand, because it goes back to that there's other boards that are making those decisions on when and how to handle their election, as well as looking at the schedule and their needs. And there's so much that goes into it that I didn't see till I was in this role.
We're talking with Debbie Binder, as she is the West Bloomfield Township Clerk. And with that, Debbie, sometimes I get even worried bringing up absentee ballots because it seems to be such a lightning rod right now. But I would imagine that that's going to be available for this day as well, May 4th. You don't have to vote in person.
Ronnie, yes. And the right to vote by absentee ballot was protected in the Constitution by Proposal 3 of 2018. I know it's a lightning rod issue right now, but the reality is it's people's right. And the best advice for somebody who really is genuinely concerned about absentee voting is work an election and find out the process involved. It's the most reassuring thing. I can tell you that people I have recruited to work elections based on just that. Most of them don't want to work, they just want to complain. But when they do actually work the election and they find out the process that's involved in absentee voting, it alleviates their concerns. I'm going to give one example. When you heard about it, TCF Center, one of the complaints was that they weren't checking the signatures that day. If they understood the process, you don't check the signatures on election day. That doesn't give the voter a chance to cure a problem. So we check those signatures as soon as those ballots come in, and if there is a problem with the signature, it doesn't match or whatever, or it isn't signed, we're making every effort to contact that voter with, if we have a phone number, an email, and we send a letter to the registered address if there's time, allowing that voter time to cure that signature deficiency. So there are reasons for everything that's done in an absent voter counting board, and if people actually work an election and find out, they're reassured. They find out how many checks and balances are in place to protect that vote. And just again, their right to vote by absentee is protected in Michigan Constitution in an election that passed by almost 70% of Michigan voters to support Proposal 3 of 2018.
So with that, I keep saying the same thing. I'm like, there's so many things behind the scenes. It's the nuances people don't understand. And so I have some friends and family members, and I'm like, please go volunteer, educate yourself on the process. And so with that, in this upcoming election in May, do you still need volunteers?
We are in good shape for this one because, again, we recruited 300 new volunteers last year, and this is only 13 of our 25 precincts. So it's a much smaller staff on election day. So we are in good shape. But if somebody wants to get involved, have them call. We have people call off, and we'll look to see where, if we can't get them involved now. Next year we have two large elections again, so we will have opportunity for people to get involved. I would absolutely urge them to do so. One thing I do want to make sure, though, Ronnie, in using your platform, that people know, if anyone is in Precinct 1, which is the Orchard Lake Middle School, that is almost half not in existence anymore physically, and they're building the new West Bloomfield Middle School. If you are a voter that votes in person at Precinct 1, Orchard Lake Middle School, you are going to be relocated through the end of 2022 to Chico Elementary. So it's just important to get that word out there. Those voters will be voting this election at Chico Elementary and going into 2022.
So yeah, let people know that so that you don't get the complaints on that day saying, hey, we were turned away, this wasn't available. You can still vote.
The calls we're going to get on that day will be people who drove by a precinct, saw a sign that has a precinct number, and didn't know why they didn't get anything about the election, and then they call up and we tell them that they're not in the West Bloomfield School District, and that usually explains to them.
Debbie Binder with us here on the MegaCast. Debbie, anything you want to add before we say goodbye to you today?
Just that we're here for questions. Anybody that's in West Bloomfield School District, this election, where the ballots are being handed out now, you can come up to Town Hall and get one. Want to advise people again to consider using the drop boxes on the east and west side of Town Hall, as the mail has experienced delays again. So if you want to guarantee, your ballot has to be in by 8 p.m. on Election Day, and it can be tracked at michigan.gov/vote. But you do want to try to make sure it's here by 8 p.m. on Election Day. Using that drop box is an effective way to do it. We check that multiple times a day. So, please get out there and vote.
So with that, though, before we say goodbye, we should let people know your office, you handle more things than just the election. Are you open for business?
We have been open for business most of the time, and even when it was by phone, we were never closed for business. We are open for passports, Ronnie, and I had them run a number this morning to give you an idea. Just since starting passports in the beginning of February, we're a passport acceptance agency, which means we're not the passport agency. We send things through to the Department of State, and we're trained to do so. So from when we began again in February, we have had 160 appointments since the beginning of February. And it's important to know that each of those appointments can be represented by a family of 2 to 5 people. So we have been doing quite a few passports since then, and we're still in the process. We have other tasks too. We are the MMRMA, which is the township's insurance rep, the member rep for that. We're doing coal tar right now, licenses and fertilizer permits. So, and the fireworks are starting to come in, those permits. So there are a lot of things that we do in the clerk's office. In addition to that, we do everything that has to do with the meetings and setting the agenda and procuring all of the information and all of the follow-up that takes place. So the clerk's office doesn't rest for very long, and when there's an election going, we get super busy.
Well, we always appreciate all the work that you and the members of your team are doing over there. Debbie, great to have you with us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me this morning.